Why don't we start on the football side? So, obviously the football season's over. It's a couple weeks in the rearview mirror now, and maybe a little bit of a disappointing ending. I think that's probably an understatement. Considering all that went into trying to get to that level and get there to win a national championship, and frankly, to not play your best game or anywhere near your best game, and play against a team of historic consequence, I think, in this Alabama offense. So it was certainly a disappointing end of the season. But a couple weeks into the offseason now, so everybody's had a little bit of a chance to decompress and think about what went well, what didn't, and now it's full on offseason. We've heard from Ryan Day, and it's kind of time to start talking about and thinking about some of these big questions that face the program this offseason. I think the obvious place to start is at quarterback, right? You've got you could probably call him a transcendent quarterback. He came to Ohio State, Justin Fields did, and was unbelievable over 2 years. I don't think anybody's ever going to forget his Sugar Bowl performance. I have to think that other than replacing Greg Mattison as a defensive coordinator, the biggest question of the offseason for me is figuring out the quarterback situation.
Yeah, and I also think it's probably Ryan Day's biggest hurdle that he's ever had since he's been in charge at Ohio State, and maybe even when he was, the offensive coordinator under Urban Meyer. I think this is really that first big obstacle you have to clear. And if it was any other position other than quarterback, if you're trying to replace a transcendent running back or an all-world offensive defensive line, I think we'd have some questions about it. But considering it's quarterback, and we've seen all the unbelievable success that he's had with developing those guys in that room, that it almost feels a little bit to me like a foregone conclusion that whoever is going to win the job is going to be able to step in and play at a really high level. Obviously, it's not going to be that line of going from Dwayne Haskins, who set all these records, to Justin Fields, who set all these records. If it's CJ Stroud or someone else, probably not going to go ahead and start writing the record books again, but it's still going to be able to go in and play at a high level. I think that is, in some ways, that's like the best part about Ryan Day, right? Like when he became the head coach, you knew that the one thing that you could probably count on if you're an Ohio State football fan is the quarterback development was going to be really, really excellent.
And frankly, he's done it, even beyond what Ryan Day has done. This run of, I guess, basically a decade now, if you think about Braxton Miller and JT Barrett, even before Haskins and obviously Justin Fields,
and they're all different quarterbacks too. That's what I think is remarkable. You're not churning out pro style guys. You're not churning out zone read run first dudes. You covered basically every possible spectrum of quarterback in the last 10, 12 years.
And the fact that they've all excelled in their own way, I think, is such a testament to the coaching at Ohio State, because it really feels like, hey, we're going to grab the best players we can, guys we believe in, and then we're going to build, a scheme around their talents, as opposed to, hey, this is the system we're running and trying to funnel guys that fit that system. I think the way they've gone about it's been a heck of a lot better.
100%. And I mean, you could throw Joe Burrow into that mix too, certainly. I think, I covered Pitt when Matt Canada was the offensive coordinator and play caller there, and the things that they did that made Nathan Peterman look so good to go on and play in the NFL is pretty much exactly what Joe Burrow did at LSU on the way to winning a national championship. But the foundation there was built by Ohio State and Ryan Day, certainly, and Urban Meyer as well. So they've checked every box, I think, quarterback wise, that you could possibly have, and the ability to adapt within the play calling, but also within scheme, I think is probably what Ryan Day maybe does best. I think he knows the skills and the attributes and the strengths of that quarterback room. He knows the weaknesses, and you stay away from the weaknesses. He really complements their strengths for sure.
Before we go more into the quarterback side, let's focus on the other big question here. And at least to me, maybe there's more that you've come up with, but replacing Greg Mattison it has to be on the forefront of their minds. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if we have an answer relatively soon. And Ryan Day was asked about it in his press conference, first time he met with the media in the offseason earlier this week. And he basically said, look, I'm pretty open-minded on how we can, go about replacing Greg and what his responsibilities were. You you've obviously got kind of a unique situation with obviously Kerry Combs, who's a co-coordinator, but also, has a ton of experience with the secondary. Al Washington has become easily one of the best young linebacker coaches in the country. Larry Johnson on the defensive line is legendary. I mean, you've got really, really good position coaches. So I guess you have the ability to be very selective with what you want out of your new coordinator. And I know Kerry Combs is going to be in the crosshairs this offseason, and I'm sure Kerry's not happy with the pass defense this year. The one defensive stat I think that stood out to me more than anything else as the season wore along here, they finished 122 out of 127 in FBS in pass defense. And it's kind of remarkable that you have a team that went all the way to the national championship game that struggled that badly on the whole against the pass. Obviously, that had something to do with playing two of the best offenses in college football. You've got Trevor Lawrence and Mac Jones that both threw for a bunch of yards. Indiana torched Ohio State through the air. A couple of 400-yard games, really not what they're looking for. So they've got to find a way to shore that up in the offseason for sure.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why you maybe saw some of the issues in the back end was that defensive line, the Rushman package that we've seen from Ohio State now for the last 6-7 years has been so unbelievably dominant, was maybe like a level down from years past. And I think you could probably see a little bit of the growing pains there with a fresh group. I know they really relied on Jordan Fuller a lot at safety the last couple of years to be able to shore some of that up. And when you're only able to kind of keep everything in front of you, but also that the quarterback only has like a half second to get the ball out, or Chase Young or one of the Bosas is going to get in there and make a play, it makes things a lot simpler. It's one read, your hips are always kind of going in one direction. And that really wasn't the case this year. That defensive line was excellent, but maybe not up to the unbelievably good standards that we've seen from Ohio State in years past. I actually think if you've got the guy in-house already, if you're Ryan Day for that next full coordinator job, I think it's Al Washington. And I think what Kerry Combs has done in his career has been pretty remarkable, coming from a high school coach going all the way NFL and back to college. And I really like what he does schematically with those DBs. I think he had some inexperience, especially at safety this year. And I think safety was a big problem in certain games with reads. And you really saw some undisciplined or some bad eye discipline from those safeties this past year. That probably will be improved dramatically coming into that next season. And I think that's something that you'll see Kerry really drill into those guys going forward. But I really think it's Al Washington. Bishop Watterson grad, Columbus guy, has taken all the incremental steps in coaching that you kind of like to see. That defensive coordinator is just that next one. I think he's ready. And also it gives you, the opportunity to keep the coaches that are there now doing what they do best. Kerry is still, doing everything that he does in the back end. Larry Johnson is, the legend that he is with coaching those guys with their hand in the dirt. Now this gets Al Washington to improve the linebackers a little bit and then also expand that out to the whole defensive package. I think he's going to be the guy.
I wouldn't hate it one bit. I love his energy. I love what he's done with the linebackers. And frankly, I'm excited to see. I know some people are more worried than excited because of, the linebackers that are moving on from this year's team. I'm kind of excited to see what he's going to do with this next group of linebackers. You lose Tuff Borland and Pete Warner and Baron Browning and Justin Hilliard. I mean, it kind of feels like those four guys have been in Columbus forever. And I know sometimes we say that, when guys become seniors and they've been around for a while, but I mean, Justin Hilliard literally was the longest tenured Buckeye on the team. He played high school football like 6 or 7 years. I guess it was 6 years in Ohio State. So 7 years ago, right? I mean, they've been around for a long time. So I'm excited to see how Coach Washington works with this next group of linebackers. Dallas Gant certainly among them. I can't wait to see Tommy Eichenberg get a chance. I hope he gets some playing time this year. I think he could be really, really good. But I think Al would be a great pick if they can lock that down at defensive coordinator.
I love you seeing holding the Ignatius torch there. By the way, I knew that was coming in. Yeah, exactly. Tommy's a great example. Taraja Mitchell, I think, is another guy you're going to see kind of step in there and play. I think you're going to see the overall speed of the linebackers improve this upcoming season. I think if there was one knock that you were going to have on this position group that we've seen play together now for an extended period of time, it was that sideline to sideline speed that was maybe not quite at the level that you would expect at Ohio State. I think we saw that really be a problem when Greg Schiano was the defensive coordinator a couple of years ago, and that weird gap contain linebackers at the line of scrimmage kind of thing, where the Ohio State's defense just got flat out exposed 2018, 2019. And I think they played a little bit more to the strengths of Tuff Borland and Pete Warner, being able to read, maybe get one guy on a block, the other guy goes in and cleans up. And I think that is something that overall team speed, overall group speed at linebacker, I think will improve a lot. And I think that you'll see a pretty remarkable difference between this past season and this upcoming season at linebacker. But I think it's also interesting that I wouldn't be surprised to see some of the same growing pains that we saw at safety this year at linebacker this upcoming year. Dallas Gant, I think, is one of those dudes that, an Ohio kid. We saw him play high school football up in Toledo. We know his kind of whole story, so to speak, that you're kind of wondering if he's going to be able to step into that role. Kayvon Pope is another one that I think we'll see some pretty decent playing time. But I think if you're Al Washington and all the sub coaches in that linebacker room, you're just excited because it's a full on open door. You've got 3 spots to fill and literally anybody can jump in. That competition is probably going to be the best of all the position groups at Ohio State coming in to the 2021 season.
Yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to that too. Any other big questions that you have in mind before we kind of jump back toward the quarterbacks? Anything else you want to chat about?
So I love the coaching carousel on the assistant level in college football is something that I think you can drive yourself crazy trying to keep track of who's like up and coming, right? And like who's going to go where. I covered Virginia Tech football for 2 years, and got to know Frank Beamer, the legendary coach there, really, really well. And they have an alumni program that really is pretty impressive when it comes to getting former players in at like grad assistant levels or like entry level assistant coaches. There was a guy that I thought really had a chance to maybe get a look at that next level program. Darryl Tapp, who you might remember, played for Virginia Tech on the defensive line, was a really, really good player. I thought maybe he was one of those guys that you could see come into that like tier 1 college football program. And then that was a guy I was kind of keeping an eye on for maybe if Al Washington got bumped to, full defensive coordinator, who comes in underneath him. And then he just went to the NFL literally like 2 hours ago or an hour ago when we're taping this here on a Wednesday. So you can go ahead and take him out of the pile. It's already a huge pile of guys that you could potentially see come into that group, but you could go ahead and take him out. So that is like, I think one of the more fascinating things about college football, right? And it could drive you crazy. I genuinely pity the people who have to cover that on a day in and day out basis. All the names, all the dudes who are trending upward, and then you have to go and try and predict where they're going to go next. It's absolutely crazy. I usually try and stay out of it in some ways because I think it's almost too crazy for me on a day in and day out basis. But the one thing that I will say when it comes to filling Greg Mattison's after he's retiring and filling certain spots, Urban Meyer had a rule that he wanted at least a 2-year, possibly a 3-year commitment from assistant coaches. And then after that, we'll get you where you want to go, right? You basically can have your pick. If you give me 2 years or you give me 3 years, we're going to get you to that quote unquote dream job if that spot, this current spot, isn't already what you want. And if you go back and you look at some of the assistants in years past, that's pretty much been the case. That's kind of your window at Ohio State. Now we're in, the already kind of short tenure of Ryan Day. I'm really curious to see if that's still the rule, if that's a rule that he's kind of adopting on his end now that he's the head coach in charge of the program, because I think it's a really smart way to get the best out of people in a short period of time.
Well, and frankly, it's such an attractive place to be, obviously, as a head coach.
Right.
But, if you become a coordinator at Ohio State, right now in the prime of this program, I mean, there aren't too many better spots to be. But to your point, if you're going to leave, you could probably name your spot. And I think that's part of what Nick Saban's done so well at Alabama. He's taken a lot of these coaches, some of them young, some of them former coaches that struggled elsewhere, brought them to Alabama and basically turned them loose. And, a couple of years later, they've gone on to do pretty awesome things.
Look at Charles Huff is a perfect example, right? A couple years at Alabama, does really, really well, A1 recruiter, and now he's the head coach at Marshall after they dropped Doc Holliday for after his decade plus in charge of the Herd. That's a sleeping giant in Conference USA. If you get a guy in there who's an A1 recruiter, and someone who's learned under, probably the greatest college football coach of all time in Nick Saban, that's just success on a platter, and I think there are a number of guys. Steve Sarkisian is another one that I think if you come into these top tier programs, we're talking about the Alabamas, Clemson's, Ohio States, and give it your best and you're successful, that next job is almost a foregone conclusion.